Something is happening in the Pacific Ocean right now that most weather channels aren't talking about with the urgency it deserves. And I want to be straight with you from the very beginning of this video. This is not a typical seasonal forecast. This is not the usual warmer than normal winter expected headline that comes and goes every few years. What we are watching unfold in real time, right now, in August of 2026, is something that the scientific community is calling potentially the most powerful climate-forcing event in the modern instrumental record. And what makes it different this time, what makes it genuinely alarming, is not just what it is, it's how fast it's growing, how many separate systems are amplifying it at once, and what the data is already telling us about what comes next. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why meteorologists are using language they almost never use. And you're going to understand what it means for where you live. Let me set the scene. Right now, as you watch this, the Equatorial Pacific Ocean, that vast stretch of water running along the tropics from South America all the way to the Western Pacific, is running a fever, not a small one, not the kind that breaks in a few weeks. The latest data from the International Research Institute for Climate and Society shows that the Southern Oscillation Index, the primary atmospheric measure of El Niño's grip on the global circulation, reached negative 29.1 in July 2026. And the most recent 30-day value through mid-August remains strongly negative at negative 18.6. If those numbers don't mean anything to you yet, let me translate them. The more negative that index goes, the tighter the grip El Niño has on the entire planet's weather machine. Negative 29. That is not a number meteorologists throw around casually. Here's the technical term you need to know, El Niño. And here is what it actually means in plain language. Picture the Pacific Ocean as a giant bathtub. Normally, the trade winds, those persistent winds that blow from east to west across the tropics, push warm surface water toward the western side of that bathtub, toward Indonesia and Australia. The eastern side, near South America, stays cooler because cold, deep water wells up to replace what gets pushed away. That's the normal state. That's La Niña, or neutral conditions. El Niño happens when those trade winds weaken or reverse, the warm water sloshes back eastward, sea surface temperatures across the central and eastern equatorial Pacific rise above normal. And when that happens, it doesn't just warm the ocean, it rewires the entire global atmosphere from the ground up. Think of it like changing the engine in a car while it's still moving. Everything downstream of that engine, every pressure system, every jet stream, every storm track across the northern hemisphere shifts in response. Now, we've had El Niños before. We've had strong ones. The 1997 to 1998 event reshaped weather patterns so dramatically that it became the reference point meteorologists have used for nearly 3 decades. The 2015 to 2016 event was called a Super El Niño, and it lived up to the name. But what is developing in the Pacific right now? Current forecasts show this El Niño is projected to exceed the Super El Niño threshold of plus 2 degrees Celsius and push beyond a plus 3 degree anomaly. Let that land for a moment. Plus 3 degrees above the long-term average across the entire equatorial Pacific. The latest data shows warm Pacific waters are expanding, and new forecasts are pushing this event deeper into the Super El Niño category, suggesting this could be the strongest El Niño event in the historical record. We are not talking about the strongest in a decade. We are talking about potentially the strongest since humans began systematically measuring ocean temperatures, and the models are not hedging on this. The mid-August 2026 intensity assessment from the International Research Institute is striking. The model ensemble points to 25 out of 26 models, placing the Niño 3.4 index in the very strong category for the October through December season. The assessment describes the outlook as truly off the charts. Off the charts. That phrase came from scientists, not headline writers. So what is actually driving this? Because El Niño doesn't just appear out of nowhere. There is a mechanism underneath it. And understanding the mechanism is what separates a real forecast from a guess. A massive downwelling Kelvin wave has propagated east across the equatorial Pacific, with subsurface temperature anomalies of up to plus 8 degrees Celsius between roughly 50 and 250 meters depth. That warm water is now surfacing in the eastern Pacific, fueling continued surface anomaly growth. A Kelvin wave. Picture an underwater heat pulse, a slow-moving wall of warm water traveling just beneath the ocean surface from west to east across the entire Pacific basin. It travels invisibly, thousands of meters below where we live and breathe, and then it rises to the surface, and suddenly the atmosphere above it has completely different instructions to follow. A rare triplet of tropical cyclones in the western Pacific earlier this spring produced strong, persistent westerly winds that reversed the normal trade wind direction. These bursts mechanically pushed warm surface water eastward and acted as a known precursor to large El Niño events. That is the trigger that loaded this gun. 3 tropical systems in sequence, each one pushing the warm water further east, each one weakening the trade winds a little more until the normal circulation pattern of the tropical Pacific simply gave way. Stay with me, because now we need to talk about what comes next. And this is where it gets genuinely complicated and genuinely important. A new analysis confirms that the 2026 Super El Niño has not just strengthened the Pacific, it has already restructured the global atmosphere. The weather pattern that will reshape the American winter is no longer a probability forecast. It is described as a locked mechanical consequence of a planetary-scale pressure structure now running over the Pacific. When meteorologists use the word locked, they mean the large-scale pattern has become self-reinforcing. The ocean is warming the atmosphere, which reinforces the pressure structures, which further suppress the trade winds, which allows the ocean to warm further. It is a feedback loop, and we are already inside it. Here is what that locked pattern means in practical terms for the United States. The Super El Niño has locked a split flow pattern into place, setting flood risk for the Gulf Coast and Southeast, while the northern tier faces a milder, drier winter. NOAA gives 97% odds the event persists through spring 2027, a split flow pattern. Picture the jet stream, that river of fast-moving air in the upper atmosphere that steers our weather systems, splitting into 2 separate branches instead of flowing as one coherent stream. The southern branch dips down across the southern United States, pulling storm systems and moisture along with it. The northern branch lifts well above the U.S.-Canada border, leaving the northern tier in a warm, dry bubble. 2 Americas sitting right next to each other, experiencing almost opposite winters. That is what a strong El Niño does to the jet stream. And the stronger the El Niño, the more pronounced that split becomes. The latest ECMWF forecast for December through February identifies a deep, low-pressure anomaly near the Aleutian region and higher pressure across Canada, favoring above-normal temperatures across Canada, the northern United States, the west coast, and parts of the northeast, with cooler anomalies across Texas, the Gulf Coast, and southeast. For the northern tier, the Great Lakes, the upper Midwest, the northern plains, this looks like a winter that doesn't feel like winter for long stretches. Mild air dominating. Snow events possible, but less frequent than average. If you live in Minneapolis or Chicago and you're hoping for a snowy winter, the models are not on your side right now. But here's the part most people will miss. And this is the counterintuitive flip side of the story. The detail that gets buried in the headlines about warmth and mild conditions. While the northern tier watches a quieter, milder winter unfold, the southern United States is being set up for something very different. The August through October 2026 rainfall outlook shows a classic strong El Niño footprint, with wetter than normal conditions expected across western North America south of 45 degrees north and southeastern South America, while drier than normal conditions dominate other regions. And for the Gulf Coast and southeast specifically, the enhanced southern jet stream during a Super El Niño doesn't just bring more rain, it brings more organized, more persistent, more impactful precipitation events. The Mississippi Valley, the Tennessee Valley, coastal Texas, and Louisiana, these regions need to be paying attention not to snowfall forecasts, but to flood forecasts. Because the same atmospheric configuration that keeps the northern tier warm and dry actively funnels moisture into the south. That is the El Niño paradox, and it plays out every time we get a strong event. Let me be honest with you about the uncertainty in this forecast, because I think you deserve that honesty. NOAA's Ken Graham offered a necessary note of meteorological humility. Every El Niño is not the same. Each one is unique with its own imprint on our weather. Stronger events make certain impacts more likely, but they do not guarantee them. The broad pattern, light warmer north, stormier south, active Pacific storm track, carries high confidence. The specifics of individual storm tracks, snowfall totals in individual cities, exact timing of cold intrusions, that is where forecast skill drops significantly. What I'm giving you here is the large-scale framework. The skeleton of what winter looks like when the Pacific is doing what it's doing right now. The flesh on those bones will be filled in as we get closer. Now I want to talk about something that is not getting the attention it deserves. Because El Niño is only part of the story right now. A cold ocean anomaly is returning to the far North Atlantic, in the same region where past large-scale cooling events have appeared. The cold blob is expanding again, with forecast data suggesting it can persist into winter 2026 through 2027. Cold anomalies in this region often precede larger pressure and jet stream changes. This is the North Atlantic Cold Blob, a persistent pool of anomalously cool water south of Greenland that has been linked in past research to disruptions of the Atlantic circulation and changes in the pressure patterns that govern European and Eastern North American weather. The cold blob doesn't make the news the way ocean warming does. It is quieter, slower, less dramatic, but meteorologists who study long-range patterns watch it very carefully. Early signs are emerging for a potentially more disrupted polar vortex during winter 2026 through 2027. New long-range data shows a notable January weakening signal in the stratosphere, while several major background drivers are developing in a way that can increase the chance of a more dynamic winter pattern across the United States, Canada, and Europe. Here is why the polar vortex matters. Think of the polar vortex as a spinning top sitting over the Arctic, its rotation keeping the coldest air locked near the North Pole. When it spins strongly and consistently, cold stays in the Arctic where it belongs, and winter in the mid-latitudes stays relatively orderly. But when the polar vortex weakens, when something disturbs that spinning top, it wobbles. And when it wobbles, it allows tongues of Arctic air to spill southward into the continental United States and Europe in sudden, dramatic cold outbreaks that can last for weeks. In low ice years, the polar vortex is weaker in the stratosphere, with higher pressure and temperature. A weak polar vortex can often result in a major stratospheric warming event, which can collapse the polar vortex and create a blocking pattern for the United States and Europe, bringing cold air and snowfall. And right now, we have record low Arctic sea ice in the Barents-Kara Sea region, one of the areas most strongly linked to polar vortex disruption. So what the data is telling us is this. The background state of the northern hemisphere this winter could set up a situation where a predominantly mild, El Niño-driven pattern is periodically interrupted by sudden, sharp, potentially severe cold outbreaks driven by a weakened and disrupted polar vortex. A mild winter with violent exceptions. That is harder to forecast and harder to prepare for than a consistently cold winter, and that is what the data is pointing toward. And now, the third piece of the puzzle, the one that makes this year truly different from any Super El Niño we've seen before. A new ocean anomaly called the Indian Ocean Dipole is emerging alongside the Super El Niño. It occurs in the Indian Ocean and consists of two opposite temperature anomalies. A positive Indian Ocean Dipole creates a massive tropical atmospheric cell, transforming the IOD from a localized anomaly into a major driver in the tropical atmosphere. In the Indian Ocean, a positive Indian Ocean Dipole phase is expected to develop, reaching in August through October 2026, seasonal mean value of 0.6 degrees Celsius. Think of the Indian Ocean Dipole as a second forcing on the global atmosphere, a second engine running simultaneously with El Niño. In a positive phase, the western Indian Ocean warms relative to the east, changing rainfall patterns across eastern Africa, southern Asia, and Australia, and altering the flow of air across the tropics in ways that reinforce and amplify what El Niño is already doing. Normally, you get one of these major ocean forcings at a time. Right now, we have three: the Super El Niño in the Pacific, the North Atlantic Cold Blob, and the positive Indian Ocean Dipole, all operating simultaneously and all pointing in the same direction. This is the convergence that is making climate scientists and long-range meteorologists sit up straight. The UN Secretary General described the situation plainly. El Niño is not just on our doorstep. It is inside the house and turning up the heat. And this is only a warm-up act. Let's bring this back down to Earth. What does all of this mean for you, in practical terms, right now in August 2026? If you live in the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, coastal Texas, Florida, the message from the data is clear. Winter 2026 into 2027 carries elevated flood risk. Not guaranteed flooding, but a pattern that strongly favors persistent, heavy rainfall from a series of organized storm systems riding that enhanced southern jet. Start thinking about that now. Know your flood risk, know your local drainage patterns. If you live in a flood-prone area, the window to prepare is not February. It is now. If you live in the northern tier, the Great Lakes, the upper Midwest, the northern plains, the pattern suggests a milder than average winter overall. But let me be honest with you, a weakened polar vortex can flip that narrative in a matter of days. A sudden stratospheric warming event, which is on the table this January based on current data, can bring brutal cold outbreaks to the exact same regions that were sitting in record warmth the week before. The mild baseline makes those sudden cold shots feel even more extreme by contrast. Do not let a warm November lull you into complacency. If you live in Europe, the data from the Climate Prediction Center and the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts is pointing toward a winter that swings between warmer than normal periods and disruptive, blocked cold outbreaks, particularly across the northern portions of the continent. For Europe, the polar vortex disruption signal supports cold anomalies over northern parts of the continent, while warmer anomalies dominate central, western, and southern Europe. A tale of two Europes, divided by latitude, with the north bearing the brunt of the disruptions. Here is what I'm watching in the weeks ahead. Three things. First, the weekly Niño 3.4 sea surface temperature readings. Sustained values above plus 1.5 degrees Celsius through early autumn confirm the very strong pathway, while values consistently above plus 2.0 degrees confirm that Super El Niño status is maintained. Both thresholds appear already on track based on current readings. Second, the state of the Arctic sea ice through September. The extent of the ice loss in the Barents-Kara Sea region is the single most important indicator for polar vortex stability this winter. A continued severe deficit is the warning sign. Third, the development and persistence of the positive Indian Ocean Dipole through autumn. If all three of these signals remain on their current trajectory, and right now all three are, then what we are looking at for winter 2026 into 2027 is not a normal El Niño winter. It is something we genuinely do not have a perfect historical analog for. New ensemble model runs from the ECMWF, NOAA, and BOM now align on a high-impact trajectory, with several forecasts suggesting this event could become the strongest El Niño in modern history, potentially surpassing the record-breaking event of 1877 to 1878. 1877. We are talking about comparing what is unfolding right now to the strongest event since the United States had not yet completed its transcontinental railroad. That is the scale of what the data is pointing to. I am not here to alarm you for the sake of views. I am here because the data is alarming, and pretending otherwise would be the actual disservice. The pattern has sent a warning. The warning is written in ocean temperatures and atmospheric pressure readings and stratospheric data from thousands of weather balloons launched around the globe every single day. And unlike a lot of warnings, this one is coming with months of lead time, which means you actually have the opportunity to act on it. Check your emergency kits. Know your flood maps if you live in the south. Don't let a warm start to winter prevent you from being ready for what the data says could be coming later. Pay attention to the polar vortex updates that will start appearing in November and December. Those updates are not just for weather enthusiasts. They are the early warning system for the cold outbreaks that a weakened vortex can produce. I will be covering every major development in this pattern as it evolves, the October Niño readings, the November stratospheric data, and the first real model consensus on the polar vortex state heading into winter. If you want to stay ahead of this, rather than reacting to it after it arrives, subscribe and turn on notifications, because that is exactly what this channel is built to do. And I want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments and tell me, is your region in the warm, quiet north this winter, or are you in the stormier south that El Niño tends to favor? And here is the bigger question I want you to think about when a weather event of this magnitude is forecast months in advance with this level of scientific confidence. Do we, as a society, do enough with that lead time? Or do we still end up reacting instead of preparing? Think about it. Stay safe, stay weather aware.